Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I'm Dr. Leslie Williams, and this lecture covers the basics of sexual reproduction. We'll first start with the very important question, why? Why sexual reproduction and not the alternative, which is asexual reproduction? And then we'll look at the overview of sexual reproduction and development in mammals using humans as an example. And finally, we'll look at the reproductive costs that each gender contributes. So what do females contribute to sexual reproduction and development, and what do males contribute, and how does this affect their lifestyle and body plans? So the first question I want to address is the fact that not all reproduction is sexual. So we usually equate the word sex and reproduction, but they're not always equatable in the animal kingdom. In fact, many animals do something else called asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, you basically just make a clone of yourself, as we can see here with the sea anemone. So there's one anemone that's basically breaking off into two identical organisms. If humans had the ability to have asexual reproduction, we would simply take a cell somewhere in our bodies and say, this cell is going to be the beginning of a new baby. And we would allow it to develop and grow, and it would produce an identical human to yourself. That's not what we do. We do something else called sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, you have two individuals that both contribute DNA to the new organism, which is called offspring. Now, offspring is just a fancy word for kids or babies. So when you have a male and a female, the female contributes the egg and the male contributes the sperm. These are respectively known as gametes. When they fuse together, you have a process called fertilization, and now you have a unique, genetically unique individual or a genetically unique cell that can develop into an individual called a zygote. So again, sexual reproduction is going to involve two organisms, and the advantage of sexual reproduction is obviously substantial, because if we look at what it takes to actually go through sexual reproduction, we realize that it would be so much simpler if we could just say, you know, I want to have a baby today. I'm going to take a cell somewhere in my body and say grow and develop into a new organism. That would be really easy, but it's not the way we do it. So clearly there's some big advantages to saying, no, I'm going to go ahead and make an egg or make sperm and try to actually get them together and create a new offspring, a genetically unique offspring. So what are the advantages of sexual reproduction? You might be thinking to yourself, well, sex. Sex is fun, but that's not what we're referring to. We're referring to the biological principle of sexual reproduction. What is it about reproducing in a sexual manner, i.e. two individuals contribute to the same organism, that is so advantageous that it's actually worth all of the headaches and other possible disadvantages that come with it? So here's the major advantage. You get genetic diversity. If you simply just make a clone of yourself over and over and over again, the problem is that you don't get the genetic diversity. Yes, you may have some DNA or traits that are very advantageous to that environment, but you may also have some traits that are disadvantageous to that environment. And so therefore you have no way to purge them or get rid of them from a new offspring. This allows you to kind of mix and match genes from different individuals to create a unique assortment of organisms that are all a little bit different. By doing so, you create diversity. This allows you to have some individuals that are going to have a higher fitness. In other words, a genetic adaptation that allows them to procure a resource a little bit better for their environment, and thus it gives the population the ability to evolutionarily adapt. And this is particularly important in a changing environment. So it's so critical that populations have that ability to evolutionarily adapt that every animal population is going to rely in some way on sexual reproduction. For mammals, it is the only method of reproduction. In other words, once we look at just the mammals, that's all you're going to see is sexual reproduction. There is no ability to have asexual reproduction. So what we're going to do is we're going to use humans to basically go through the process of sexual reproduction in mammals. And this is going to provide the foundation from which to explore the marine mammal and how they do sexual reproduction and development and some of their challenges and adaptations. So we'll start with humans. When we look at humans, we have males and females, and they each contribute a gamete. A gamete is just a fancy word for basically an egg or a sperm. Obviously, the female is going to contribute the egg, the male contributes the sperm. The process of fertilization is when the sperm actually penetrates the egg and delivers its half of the DNA. So sperm only contain half the amount of DNA that a new organism requires, and eggs contain half the amount of DNA that a new organism requires. When they fuse together, that process is called fertilization, and the resulting fertilized egg is better known as a zygote. Now, a zygote is going to be a single cell, but now this cell can go through cellular division, grow and divide, and this ball of cells that results from that cellular division process will eventually become very numerous and start differentiating and transforming into something recognizable as a new individual. So for humans, that would of course be a new baby. So again, starting with a single cell or a zygote, you go through the process of cellular division. As the cells divide and grow, they begin to transform into the recognizable and characteristic parts of a human. By 20 weeks of development, after you've had 20 weeks of all this cellular division from just a single cell, the fetus is going to actually look pretty distinctly human. Okay. Because marine mammals, in fact all mammals, tend to share very similar reproductive anatomy, we're going to use, again, human, female, and male anatomies to look at some of the anatomical features of reproduction, particularly where some of these things happen. So of course, when we look at the female anatomy, there's a lot of concern with the vagina. But in reality, the vagina is just a receptacle for sperm. It's what receives the sperm. The real important organs are not the vagina, but rather the ovaries. The ovaries are going to be these organs that are basically internalized in a female in this area right in here. A human female has two of them right here. And they are going to be the gonads. The word gonad means where are the gametes produced. So if a female produces eggs, this is actually where the eggs are produced. And many women and some men are familiar with the idea that once a month there seems to be this cycle in post-pubescent women where they have their period or menses, and that's actually kind of a whole big cycle related to the production of an egg. It turns out that once a month, one egg is also released, which is better known as an oocyte, from one of the ovaries, and it's captured by this oviduct and then travels down the oviduct into this organ right here, which is called the uterus. Now, if the egg is fertilized by a sperm, then you'll get implantation along that uterus right there, and that starts the process of gestation. So again, another look at basically what's happening in the female reproductive tract. The ovary, which is the gonad, is going to release an egg once a month. It's swept into this oviduct. If it's fertilized by sperm, that's going to happen somewhere early in the oviduct. And then once you have that zygote will start dividing into a ball of cells. And then, of course, you have implantation. Implantation is where that ball of cells basically snuggles into the lining of the uterus and creates a blood supply with the mother. The blood supply is going to allow nutrients to flow into that developing embryo so that it can get enough nutrients to sustain its growth and development. And that process starts what's called gestation. Gestation is just a fancy word for saying I'm carrying an embryo or fetus through term. So now we get into the male anatomy. The male anatomy is actually a little bit more complicated, but more physiologically simple. Again, a lot of the male anatomy is more externalized, and we'll talk about some of the reasons for that in subsequent lectures. But if you look at the male anatomy, we have external genitalia, which include the penis and then the scrotum. And that seems to be the case for almost all mammals, but not all mammals, including marine mammals. So again, we'll look at those differences later on. The penis's only job is basically to deliver the sperm. Just like with females, we basically have a region that's much more important, and those are going to be the gonads, where the gametes produced. And for males, it's going to be the testes, which are encased in the sac known as the scrotum. So the sperm is produced here, and unlike females, which produce only one egg a month, or at least human females do, males produce sperm all of the time once they hit puberty and for the rest of their lives. And so they can produce millions of sperm per day. They're created here, they're stored here, and they mature here. And then basically when a male gets ready to deliver that sperm, they travel through this tube right here, which is called the vas deferens, and then down the penis shaft through ejaculation. So that's basically the male anatomy. Now, when we look at mammals, we notice that there's some trends compared to some of the other animals that we might encounter. And one of the first trends in sexual reproduction and development is that fertilization is internalized in mammals. In other words, when you look at where fertilization occurs, it happens within the female body. That's different than animals that, let's say, like fish or frogs. A fish might lay a bunch of eggs that are unfertilized, swim away, and then a male fish will come and spray sperm all over them. And these eggs are going to actually be held outside of the body. And so this is an example of external fertilization. That's not what mammals do. Mammals do internal fertilization. So that means that the penis actually has to be able to insert into the vagina in order to deliver the sperm for the internal fertilization. There can't be any separation of events on that. Also, gestation is mostly internalized in the female. Again, this is the act of carrying the offspring to full term. There are some mammals that are the exception to this, but they tend to be more the exception than the rule. Most mammals work like humans do, where you basically carry an offspring from a zygote all the way till full term. Interestingly enough, there is a relationship between gestation length and size. The larger the organism, the longer the gestation. So mice, for example, have a gestation time of just a couple weeks. Humans have a gestation time of 9 months, and elephants have a gestation time of closer to 2 years. Mammals also give live birth. This means that they don't basically lay an egg, for example, and like chickens or birds lay eggs where the embryo is still inside there away from the mom, and when they are delivered, it's an egg cracking rather than coming straight from the mother. So mammals give live birth, and then of course unique to mammals is that the females then lactate, which is to produce milk as a way to nourish offspring. Now, interestingly enough, females have a much higher what's called reproductive cost. In other words, when we look at sexual reproduction, females spend a lot more energy on sexual reproduction than males do. And this might seem a little counterintuitive at first, but it's not once you look at what reproduction actually is. For example, females produce one valuable egg to be fertilized, so that's very valuable. They also are the ones to nourish the zygote all the way to the newborn. And once a newborn is born, they continue to nourish the newborn via lactation and, in some cases, extensive parental care. So if that's the role of the females, what do the males do? Well, the males are also valuable, but they don't contribute as much energy towards it. They do provide sperm. But sperm are cheap because you can have 1 billion sperm produced in a day and only 1 egg produced in a month. So that ratio is going to be much more in favor of a valuable egg to a female. They may also be involved in defending females depending on the species and may provide some parental care. But in many species, they don't do either of those. And so that their sole goal is simply to fertilize as many females as possible. That concludes our lecture on sexual reproduction, and I will see you next time.